So people who can't join us tonight can always watch later if they want. Welcome everybody to our CBA Toolkit rollout event. We're so incredibly excited to finally be sharing this with you. It's been a long time in the making, and we have digital copies available for free download. We also have hard copies available for free. So if you want one, email us and we'll make sure to get to you somehow. First, I wanted to thank our partner. So we worked with PolicyLink, which Julian sort of represents. He works there way back when we started working on the project. We also work with Wave Pool Gallery in Camp Washington and Visionaries Voices in Northside. They did the graphic design and the art for the toolkit. And I want to thank our sponsors, including the Wilder Foundation, who is here tonight. Thank you, Beth. ArtsWave, and then many individual donors from IOB. So thank you guys. Just a quick overview of the night. So I'll do this intro and then I'll hand it over to Julian Gross, who is our Community Benefits Agreement expert. He'll do like a CBA 101, and then Margie will share our toolkit with you. And then we're gonna save about half the time for Q&A. Because I think we all feel like that will be the most useful part for everybody. So just a quick overview of Action Tank. Action Tank is a think tank that partners with artists to research and promote new public policy solutions in the Cincinnati area. Our programming falls under 3 categories. We do policy research and promotion, like this toolkit. We do civic capacity building trainings like City Council School, which most of you are familiar with. And then we do technical assistance, which is support for resident-led efforts to impact their communities in a positive way. So now I'll just introduce Julian. I'm going to read his bio. Julian Gross is one of the nation's principal experts on community benefits in land use development and public infrastructure. For over 25 years, Mr. Gross has represented nonprofits and public entities in contract negotiations, legislative and administrative drafting, and policy development aimed at advancing racial and economic equity. He has negotiated dozens of community benefits agreements, initiating and refining a groundbreaking contractual approach to resolution of challenging urban development issues. And I'm going to stop there and hand it over to Julian.
Thanks, Ioana. It's great to see everybody. I feel like I met at least a few of you when I was in Cincinnati a few years ago, working with Margie and in touch with Ioana on the discussions around the possible CBA on the stadium. So it's really heartening to see this sustained interest in community benefits in general and CBA in particular. In Cincinnati. So thanks to all of you for turning in or turning out, even just from your homes. I hope you're all taping the debate. I know that's on some people's minds, so we can all check in later on that one. Margie and Ioana have teed me up for CBAs 101. You know, I could go on for hours. I'm going to try to keep this to just 10 or 15 minutes to keep it really straightforward and leave lots of time for questions for whatever angles you guys are interested in. So as Ioana mentioned, I'm a lawyer. I got involved with Cincinnati while I was with PolicyLink, which is a national racial and economic equity advocacy and policy organization. I'm now with a law firm in San Francisco that represents public entities and nonprofits. CBAs 101. I'm actually gonna, well, no, I can't mute this. All these people coming. Welcome, all you new people. I'm Julian. I'm gonna be talking about CBAs. People use the term Community Benefits Agreement to mean all kinds of different things. I think people use it sometimes to just mean any kind of set of concepts around land use development or a public project that pertains to community benefits in any way. They certainly use it to mean sort of portions of a city's agreement with the developer that relate to community benefits. I want to use it in a very specific way. So the definition that I use for CBAs is a CBA is a legally binding contract between a developer of a land use development project and a set of advocacy organizations under which the developer commits to delivering certain community benefits if the project is approved and built, and the advocacy organizations agree to support the project or at least not oppose the project politically and legally. So that was kind of long, but I'm sure it's laid out pretty well in the toolkit. But the important things to remember here is we're talking about privately negotiated agreements, not pieces of what the government is already negotiating with the developer. So I'm going to do a diagram in a minute, if this whiteboard holds up, literally, that is going to sort of lay out this set of agreements around a urban land use project and where CBA fits in with the agreements that the public sector is negotiating. So it's important that it's private, and it's important that it is legally enforceable, that it's an actual contract. It's not a piece of paper with a nice title and a lot of people signing it, but that's not actually a contract. So that's what I'm talking about. I also, part of that definition was that it is a set of community-based organizations or advocacy organizations. Sometimes you could have agreement that meets everything else, but it's a single issue organization, is negotiated by a single organization around one or a couple issues that they care about. That's not really sort of politically what we're talking about here. We're usually talking about complex urban development projects that have a lot of different impacts and a lot of types of potential, and are moving forward in urban neighborhoods, often neighborhoods at risk of gentrification or that need economic opportunity. Those projects, almost by definition, have a heavy public sector involvement. They're not by right projects, and they affect a lot of different stakeholders, and really, you know, in the big picture, should only go forward if they make at least some effort to address all the many types of impacts they have and all the many stakeholders in a complicated urban neighborhood. Okay, let me try to do this diagram here. I haven't done this much on Zoom, but I did it once and it worked. So, all right, if I can get this, you guys are gonna have to help me out and tell me if this is working. But there, you can see the whiteboard, right?
It looks good. We can see it.
Looks good. You see my mask and my charging cords also? All right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna try to do a sort of some diagrams that I think are helpful in laying out how some of this works legally and politically and administratively, I guess, without a CBA, and then also with a CBA. The without aspect is pretty important because most land use projects are not going to have a CBA that meets the definition that I just mentioned, but how they are negotiated and developed both indicate, you know, is important on its own grounds because it shapes those projects, and it sort of reveals tension points and challenges for everyone involved with the projects. And some of those tensions and challenges need to be addressed just generally, and some are things that can be mitigated or solved with a CBA. Okay, so this is how it works with, so we're gonna do the no CBA diagram first. Okay, so up here, this body is gonna be the city. I'm gonna call it the city for this diagram. Can you read this, or is that reading backwards, the writing?
Yeah, we can see it the right way.
Yeah. Okay, good. Sorry, there's a mirror your image setting in Zoom. Okay, so this is the city. This could actually be whatever public entity is working with a developer to bring a project forward. So it could be a redevelopment agency, it could be a county, it could be a stadium district, whatever. I'm going to call it the city. Then down here you have the developer. This is a private land use developer wanting to build a usually multi-use project. I have done some CBAs around just large housing developments in urban areas, but usually we're talking about multi-use projects. I guess a stadium would fit also. It's almost always a private developer. Occasionally it could be a different public entity, right? You could have like the airport wants to expand, or a public university wants to expand in the college town, and up here you have the city. anyway, this is the government body that's deciding whether that's going to go forward, actually has approval rights, and is taking the lead on negotiating with the developer. So the key aspect here is that for these large urban projects, the public entity is almost always negotiating rather than regulating. That's a crucial factor that shapes everything else about this process legally and politically. So that's important to remember. This is not a by right project where the developer owns a piece of land, wants to build something within the zoning. If that's the case, we're not having this conversation. But usually for large multi-use projects in urban areas, they want some assurances about future city fees. They may want tax breaks. They may want a land deal to be part of this, but there's some negotiation between the city and the developer. This negotiation is going to result in a contract 9 times out of 10. I'm going to call this the DA for development agreement. It could go by any name. It could be a lease. It could be a subsidy agreement, whatever. This is the DA. It's a contract. In theory, you could have this negotiation captured just in things like conditional use permits or variances that have conditions attached to them, but it's usually a contract of some kind. So that's important. So for some projects like stadiums or, greenfields, redevelopments, et cetera, this process can take like 5 years or more to develop the plan, select the developer, negotiate out the project, and approve this development agreement. So who is doing that? You got the city, you've got all the city council members over here. They each have 1 vote. And then you've got the staff from the city that's negotiating it. These are the bunch of people, the staff, the lawyers, consultants, et cetera. Then the developer has their own people. They're the staff here. This is going on, this negotiation, not in public hearings, right? These guys who are actually the deciders, the men and women on the city council, are going to be hearing about the project maybe with updates over time, but at the end of the day, they get an up or down vote on the development agreement that these guys have put together. So obviously this is a very important role for staff because staff is supposed to get a read on what all the council members want and carry those things forward into the development agreement negotiations. They have to balance trade-offs on different issues with the developers, negotiating representatives. They, in many ways, control the flow of information between this negotiation process and the council members, et cetera. So that's crucial part. Joanna, can you make me not host? Because then I think I won't hear these dings every time someone tries to join.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So then what happens here during this process? We're still under no CBA. Out here, you have the public, right? These are all the stakeholders. And I've kind of arrayed them, up here, I'm going to say a check because these are the people who love the project. Down here, there's an X. So down here, you're going to have people like NIMBYs, right? Someone who's right next to the project just doesn't want a big project next to them. They're going to be opposed to it automatically. They don't care what's in the development agreement. They care about their particular issues. And up here, you're going to have some stakeholders and members of the public who are always going to be in support of almost any project, right? You might have the Chamber of Commerce. You might have the building trades. You might have civic organizations that are aimed at economic development. And they're going to be in favor of the project. So the thing to know about those folks and these folks, the automatic yeses and the automatic nos, is that they don't care what is in this agreement, right? But remember, the city's not legislating, they're negotiating, and these negotiations are going to set what's in this agreement. And this is an incredibly important process because for some of these projects, they're going to shape these urban neighborhoods for a generation or more. That stadium's going to be there for, most of the rest of my lifetime. But it's not just the physical thing, it's the entire pattern of urban development around a neighborhood. And it's a very strange situation where those crucial decisions are made in a negotiation process with a private party where there's a lot of back and forth for years, and then it comes out for 1 vote at the end. So, and then a huge swath of the public again, doesn't care what's in that agreement because they either think it's a bad project and it should be not approved, or a great project and they don't care about the fine points. So the parties that actually try to influence this are the people in here, right? Who have maybe one issue that they care about. There's an affordable housing group here who's like, okay, that's an okay project if you have 25% affordable units. You've got a labor union that's okay if those are going to be union jobs. You've got other local jobs advocates. You might have enviros who want to see more open space. These different parties usually have different levels of access to the information, different levels of influence within the city. They have different council members that care about each of their issues. And it starts this long process where they're all sort of bugging the city about their individual issues. And then those things, whatever traction they get, hopefully filters down to these negotiating team members for the city. Of course, they're not going to care so much about one council member's vote. They're going to want to know that multiple council members care about an issue before it becomes a major point in the development agreement negotiations. So it gets filtered out through that. And then of course it gets filtered out through the negotiation process because the developers team is not going to agree to all those points. Anyway, that all plays out. At the end of the day, you have in the development agreement a set of community benefits commitments. So what I'm talking about with community benefits are not just the fact that you have a project and it's activating a piece of land or whatever, it's going to provide some jobs automatically. It's things that need to be negotiated on top of that that aren't automatic, that you have to make a point as the public entity in the negotiations of prioritizing the level of affordable housing, whether there will be a program to try to hire local workers, whether there will be any wage commitments beyond the minimum wage applicable to those jobs otherwise, et cetera. So usually what happens is that all plays out. This development agreement is brought forward. Some people are happy, some people are sad, everyone has different views. There might be some very minor tweaks in the hallway after the public comment period, and then the project is either approved or rejected at that point. And then you've got this contract that governs the project. So the thing with contracts is they're only enforceable by the parties to the contract. So, there are exceptions. You could voluntarily write in the contract that the public can enforce it, but for the most part, that's not done. So if you are this group that cared about the affordable housing levels, and you sort of cashed in all your chips and then you supported the project and you dropped your lawsuit because you wanted to see the project go forward, and you did all that because there was a 25% affordable requirement here. Say it's 2 years from now, the developer says, wait, things have changed. The financing is not there that was there. The economic conditions are not the same. We want to keep building the project, but hey, city, we actually can only afford to do 20%. There's nothing that you can do as the affordable housing advocate who originally supported the project on the basis of 25% to stop the city from getting with the developer and bring it down to 20%. So, or whatever smaller percent they want to negotiate. The point is it's a contract, it can be amended. If you're not a party, you don't have control over that. And that's not just a concern for the stakeholders, it's also a concern for the people in the city, on the negotiating team, and on city council who pressed for a deal, a slate of commitments from the developer, because another administration can come in, they're the ones representing the city in any conversations about how the development should shift over time. So I have had city council members interested in the CBA concept that I'm about to cover tell me that they wanted there to be a CBA because of durability, quote unquote. They want to make sure that future administrations don't water down the deal that they fought really hard for at the time.
Julian, I'm sorry, but you have 3 minutes left.
All right, well, I'm now at the best part. And like I said, that was all important. I haven't even talked about CBAs, but the CBA is a pretty simple overlay on this. The CBA concept is when these groups get together, they form a coalition. And their notion is, the core concept of the coalition is that they're not each going to sort of cut their own deal and take their own position. Rather, they're going to share information, share power essentially, and move as a group, either shifting up this way if the project addresses all these needs, or shifting back this way if it doesn't. So you can see in a normal situation, if the project's controversial at all, as most complex, large urban development projects are, that if this group is credible, if they are asking for things that are generally in need in the community, that are generally for the benefit of the public and not money for their own programs, that, and it's a pretty broad coalition addressing a range of issues, particularly if it's a labor community coalition, that having this whole coalition shift up this way and support the project, or shift down this way and be opposed to the project, would be powerful politically. So that's the political dynamic around the coalition negotiation approach. The legal aspect to it is the direct negotiation of a CBA between this coalition and the developer. So this is your Exhibit A, top tier approach to a CBA. That's a document that might only be 12 or 30 pages long, that sets out just the community benefits. So it's not the complicated phone book length development agreement that has this stuff buried in it. It's transparent, it's straightforward, it's just on the issues these guys care about. And the deal here is the developer says, if my project is approved by the city and is actually built, I'll do X, Y, and Z. And these guys saying, now that you've made those legally binding specific commitments that we asked for in a legal vehicle enforceable by us, we are now shifting up this way. So it seems very transactional, but in a way, I mean, it is transactional, right? This is a negotiated transaction. So is this. And it's sort of, I feel like this set of transactions is sort of putting a name on dynamics that are always there regardless, which is who is supporting a project, who is opposing it, and why, and how real are the commitments people are making to each other in exchange for those positions. So in a way, this is transparent. It gets everything written down. I've mentioned several of the types of benefits that are included in different CBAs. I think a CBA is not really credible if, as I said, the groups are sort of just asking for money for their own programs. Not that their programs aren't good, but everyone wants money for their programs. And the CBAs that are considered models are ones where they're looking at things like affordable housing levels, living wages, et cetera. So there's all kinds of questions people have. People in city government and planning are often somewhat defensive when faced with this concept, because it is a reaction to perceived failures of the public actors to negotiate strongly and enforce those things over time. But anyway, we can cover any of that in the discussion part. So I think I better stop there and leave it for the discussion.
Thank you, Julian. That was an excellent overview. I'm sure people have lots of questions, and I just want to say, if you guys do, put them in the chat or save them till the end, and we'll make sure that we get to as many of them as we can. Before I hand it over to Margie, I just wanted to also say that these kinds of issues are the reason that we started Action Tank. I was working at City Hall for Councilmember David Mann, and Margie was advocating for Over the Rhine, as she still is. And we worked together on a few of these issues where the community was trying to negotiate a community benefits agreement with the developer, and just noted that there was no shortage of community willingness to volunteer and advocate, but what was kind of missing was policy information, both for policymakers and for residents, and also experience navigating City Hall, which not everyone has because they've never had to do it before. So that's why we made Action Tank, to be an organization that fills those gaps. So most of you know Margie, I'm sure, but I'm just gonna read a couple of sentences from her bio so that she gets a nice formal introduction too. Margie is a senior fellow at Togos Partnership, a national strategic communications organization. She's also founder and serendipity director of Art on the Streets, and was a leader in the transformation of Arts Wave, an arts advocacy and support nonprofit. She has served as advisor on national initiatives to Americans for the Arts, LISC, ArtPlace, Kresge Foundation, PolicyLink, National Endowment for the Arts, and others. Previously, she was visiting fellow at the Brookings Institution with a joint appointment in the Economic Studies and Metropolitan Policy programs. Prior to Brookings, she was a senior advisor on domestic policy in the Clinton-Gore White House. All right. Thank you, guys. I see that questions are already coming in the chat, so I'm just going to hand it over to Margie. She'll talk about the toolkit, and then we'll get to your questions.
Thanks, Joanna. It's been a while since I had a real introduction. Thanks. What Joanna said is exactly right, that, we met, I think first over an effort by residents, a large coalition of residents and organizations in Over the Rhine, seeking an agreement with a developer of the kind of the largest remaining plot of land in Over the Rhine at Elm and Liberty Streets. That was 4 years ago, I think. And it is an ongoing conversation. That piece of land is still under proposal for a new development. But what we discovered during that process for Cincinnati, in that conversation, community benefits agreements was a really new concept. It's not so new now because of the stadium debate, where it got quite a lot of attention on the effort to get a community benefits agreement. But having a guide to creating a community benefits agreement, a guide for residents to follow and sort of understand some of the things that Julian has just said, as well as some of the kinds of things that you can seek in the contract. And Julian's already mentioned a couple: affordable housing, wages for workers, local hiring. And I would just add, and I think this is in the toolkit, honestly, it's a contract, right? It's a contract between somebody who wants to build a development and people who are living or in some way a stakeholder in the area. And it could literally be almost anything that they agree to. And there are a range of things that have come up in some of these agreements that we've talked about here locally, as well, like incorporating some kind of locally inspired public art, or hiring of local artists to participate in the development. Green space, parking has been a big topic of conversation in Over the Rhine. So just keeping, there's a broad set of possibilities for what could go into an agreement. So I am just because of the need for something like this toolkit, I am so excited that we have an actual hard copy. As Joanna said at the beginning, you can download the toolkit or share the PDF with others just off of the site. But the hard copy is kind of fun. And as you'll see, it's got great illustrations from Courtney Cooper, who is a pretty famous local artist, who we collaborated with Courtney and the folks at Visionaries and Voices, as well as Waypool Gallery, and a local designer who put together the pieces. The thing about the toolkit that I think is especially helpful is remembering that, I'm not sure if Julian said it, but sometimes these negotiations can take a while, and we keep hearing from City Council, again and again, you have to start early in the process. Now, that's a little bit dependent on people at City Hall telling the developer they need to be meeting with the community, but it's also the community kind of paying attention to what's happening in their own place and reaching out to the developer early on and getting the conversation started. But when you do that, you want to be already in the position of having built your coalition, so that you come with that, some power into the conversation. And building your coalition means your partners have to understand what the deal is. Just like Julian said, that the people who are going to be joining the coalition are the people who, under a certain set of circumstances, would be willing to support or at least be neutral on a project, and not showing up en masse at a city council meeting and protesting, or meeting with city council members and sending letters to city council members and saying this is a terrible thing for our neighborhood. So if you want to avoid that, then this group of stakeholders will want a set of benefits that are agreed to in a contract. So the toolkit is helpful.
Sorry to interrupt you. Do you want me to share my screen so people can?
Yeah, share it. Go ahead. The toolkit is helpful because it really walks you through the steps, and it helps your potential partners to understand why a community benefits agreement may be exactly the thing that you need in this set of circumstances. So yeah, this is what you'll see if you go online. And the other thing that's nice about it is Julian's done amazing work with guides to CBAs, and they're super helpful for particularly for lawyers. This is really a hands-on document for neighborhood residents to be able to use to think about the steps that you're going to have to go through and the kind of coalition you want to build, the kind of research you might want to do, thinking through what a negotiation might be like and what kinds of things you might want to ask for, how you prepare for meeting with city council members or whoever the decision makers are, how you prepare for hearings where you're going to have a set of speakers, and then some great additional resources as well as examples of CBAs and other places that have been successful. Just for fun, I will share that the toolkit also comes with, there's some information about Courtney. The toolkit also comes with kind of a, this isn't a game, it's serious business, but it kind of looks like a game board with pieces. And the pieces have, that you can sort of move as you're moving through the steps to get yourself in position to have a really meaningful negotiation with the developer and to present your case to the decision makers. So I just think, I'm honestly just super excited to have this available to people in our region, and probably sounds like already we're getting requests for this toolkit from beyond, which I'm not surprised about, because when we started doing this work, we researched and found that there was really nothing like this for the particular audience and kind of this sort of easy to read, engaging style that we wanted to create. So I would say the last thing I just want to add to what Julian said, and which I think relates to one of the questions I've already seen, which is that it is true that all of this kind of useful tool in development and in encouraging equitable development and developments that really are meeting the needs of neighborhoods and not undermining goals that neighborhoods have set, really does depend on having city council members or just other decision makers who understand the community and the community's needs and goals and is listening to that and is communicating pretty clearly that it's important to them that there be a satisfied group of stakeholders before the development moves forward. Which, Julian, you may want to talk about this in a bit, the difference between that and requiring a CBA, which is probably an important distinction. But I'm encouraged by the fact that we have one of our city council members here with us tonight, and Jan Michelle Kearney, thank you for being here and showing that level of interest in this particular tool. I don't want to assume anything, but it's really meaningful that you're here. And I know that we have city council school students who are here with us as well. And I can tell you that when I'm thinking about who I'm going to vote for next year, I'm going to be really interested in knowing how people are thinking about CBAs and the role of community coalitions and community councils in decisions about equitable development in our city. So thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Margie. I'll also note that our upcoming City Council school session, the entire morning, is focused on development issues. So I know these people are super, super interested in this since they're going to get it twice. So if you all have questions, I saw a couple in the chat. I'll just start reading them. From Beth Selberger, why would a developer agree to negotiate a CBA, especially if the city already supports the developer? Oh, you need to unmute, Julian. There you
go. That for me?
Sure.
Yeah, a good question. And, if you take the question very literally, the answer is they wouldn't, right? Like developers with some very minor exceptions on some very minor issues, developers are going to do a real negotiation like this and make serious commitments when they get a signal from the city that the city wants to see that. So you know, that's if you think back to the diagram, the what the developer is looking toward is the legal right to build their project. And under the terms that they've negotiated and are comfortable with in the development agreement, if they can get that development agreement and all the related approvals without having to deal with community-based organizations at all, other than some outreach and some input and some head nodding, you know, they'll probably do that. So it's nothing against the, you know, individual humans who work for development entities who, you know, have whatever views they have, but you know, as large, you know, private for-profit companies, they have imperatives. They have lenders that, you know, are going to lend money to a project under certain terms, and you know, it's a business transaction for them, and in most cases, and so they're into getting their approval, and they will sit down with community groups and engage in real negotiations to the extent they feel like they need to do that in order to have a good, smooth hearing. So I'll note that it is possible that even a city council member who knows that at the end of the day they want to see the project go forward, maybe an area has been languishing for a long time, they have a lot of constituents who are in favor of it, they know they want it to go forward, they still probably are in a better, will be in a better position and would rather see the developer coming forward with a project with broad community support than a project that there is a lot of opposition to that seems, you know, well-founded and credible and broad-based. Even if at the end of the day they're going to vote for the project, the developer's going to get the vote. I read a quote somewhere from Teddy Roosevelt that said that, like, something, you know, he said it very elegantly, but it's something like, if you're the engineer driving a train down the tracks and there's a question about whether there's a bull in the tracks ahead of you, you know your train can run over that bull, but it doesn't mean you want the bull in the tracks, right? What you want is a smooth ride, even though you could win the fight without a smooth ride. And that goes more strongly for elected officials in general than it does for private developers.
Julian, I just wanted
so
to, oh,
the
I'm
last
sorry.
thing I want to, sorry, go ahead, Councilmember.
No, I was just gonna support you in that statement, because really being on city council, it's really difficult when developers aren't listening to the community. And, you know, for us on council, you know, first thing we always say is, what does the community say? You know, what does the community want? So I'm really interested in what you're going to say about requiring the CBA, because I'm really thinking that's where we need to go. We need to make it a requirement that communities do the CBA, and then developers sign on to it before they even get to us. But I'm anxious to see what you're going to say about that.
Yeah, I have some views on that that are not held by everybody in this field, so I can only give you my views. I feel like the notion that of the city requiring a developer to have a CBA runs into some really tricky legal and political problems pretty quick if you think about how it would actually be implemented, right? Because so you're the city. Are you comfortable telling a developer you have to come to agreement with that particular group, right? Like pointing to a group, and then, you know, it's kind of not a real negotiation with that group. What if the developer can't come to agreement with that group? You know, what if they're asking for things that, you know, are unreasonable? Like stranger things have happened that the developer actually can't, like, won't build the project if they have to do that. And what happens there? And why did you pick that group and not another group that has a different view, right? There might be another perfectly good community representative that thinks that the first group is a sellout or thinks it's a terrible project. So I think there's some political problems with picking one particular group. And if you don't pick a group and you just tell the developer, hey, come back with a deal with a credible community-based organization, they can come back with one of the groups way up here. You know, the groups that are just always going to be in favor of the project with, you know, not really any real requirements. That's what happened in New York, where an elected official really wanted to see the project go forward, didn't want the developer pressed too hard, and arranged for a CBA between the developer and, like, it was the Chamber of Commerce and a local CDC that was going to build a big portion of the project. That was the CBA. And it, squeezed out space for a real community benefits negotiation and kind of impeded the community benefits aspect of the project. So, I mean, I think there are other things that a city can do to facilitate these kind of negotiations without actually like requiring an executed contract.
But Julian, what if the group has to be the community council? If we say, you have to go to the community council, not just any group, but it has to be the group that's appointed to actually represent that community.
Yeah. I think that might work because you've got a good designated group system in Cincinnati there. Margie has thoughts on that.
You can finish your thought, Julian.
Could I also ask a question? So we don't.
Well, can I just respond to that first? Just say,
Yeah.
Community councils vary a lot across neighborhoods. And as a resident of Over the Rhine, I can tell you that our coalitions for Elm and Liberty, for the FC Cincinnati, for Maine and Schiller was actually, I think that was a community council thing. But oftentimes in our community council, we have a lot of people in Julian's sketch that are in the upper group who want development in Over the Rhine no matter what. They don't care what it is, just more density, more development, just build it. And then we have a bunch of people who are on the other end who are like, if it's not 100% affordable housing for people under 30% of AMI, then we don't want it. And so we typically try to bring together the people who are in the middle, some of whom are members of community council, but some who are not, and who might represent, for example, the Historic Preservation Foundation, the Over the Rhine Foundation's infill group often gets involved because they care about a different thing and we partner with them. So I don't know. I mean, I could see where that, if it was Over the Rhine Community Council, it probably wouldn't work just because we are too divided with different perspectives about our neighborhood to make that work.
Can I ask another question that's related, which is that we have talked about how one of the reasons that it seems like CBAs have come to exist, especially be used in Cincinnati, is because there is not a clear city policy on what is expected in terms of community engagement when it comes to developers. And it's like the Wild West out there. And then often when it gets to the council level, some council members insist on further community engagement. And it can be very disruptive to developers and very empowering for some community groups, and can also lead to additional like infighting amongst community groups. And so CBAs have started to become in Cincinnati a way that developers are like throwing communities a bone. And I wouldn't necessarily say that they're good CBAs in all instances, but it's something that they can, if they can achieve it and then take it to council, they can say, oh, look, we did this, we engaged with the community and we have this contract. So Julian, if we don't recommend community benefits agreements like across the board, do you have recommendations, at least for places like resources that we could look for good community engagement policies for developers that the city could implement?
Yeah, it's a little tricky because there's a lot in what you just said, and some of it tied back to the exchange we were just having about CBA requirements, right? Where my view is that it is really one of the things that cities can do to facilitate good community benefits negotiations, transparency, and public involvement is just putting better information out there around the project and not doing the whole thing, behind closed doors over here in that negotiation session. That said, there's plenty of bad community engagement out there, right? Like there's plenty, you can have projects where there've been 200 charrettes and stakeholder events and all kinds of things. And the thing was, none of the input was listened to, right? Like just having that doesn't mean that the input is going to be listened to. So, I think that having transparency is a precondition, but we shouldn't think that transparency means it's going to change the power dynamics and the ultimate outcome of the project. So that's where, whether anyone's coming forward with a CBA or not, it's really incumbent on the leadership of city council members to determine, to make their own assessment of how strong the project is and what the developer can do, and to really look at how much community support there is for the project. That's the thing, right? They need to make sure that the developers are engaging with the community. They're trying to deliver support and send them. I think the strongest message from a city council member to a developer is, I care about the amount of community support for this project from all my stakeholders, from all the people in my district. And the more you can come forward with a project that is overwhelmingly supported in my district, the stronger I'm going to fight for that project with my colleagues if they have any concerns, and you're definitely going to have my vote. But you come in very divided with people saying you didn't sit down with them, they don't like the outcome, you got a couple that you threw some money to for their programs that are the ones that are forward. To me, that's an indication that you didn't do what I want to see as someone representing my complicated district. That would be like the best message that would send it very clear to the developer. You need to sit down with people and get as much support as possible. And this sounds very sort of political, but I mean, to me, that's democracy, right? Like, that's what you're supposed to be doing, is representing the public, and that's what these public hearings are for, is to hear who in the public supports these projects and who doesn't. So the public hearings, so the one thing I would say that's structural that I think would facilitate all this is multiple hearings to consider the development agreement when it is ultimately brought forward, right? Like, I've seen projects that are massive, $8 billion projects brought forward with a 6 phone book sized development agreement released 3 days before the vote. And, the council members are as out of luck as anybody else in understanding, much less influencing, a project brought forward in that way. So, we don't need all the charrettes, but we do need a little more public consideration of what is actually being voted on. That's what I would say.
Thank you. It reminds me of Councilmember Flynn, who used to say that we need consequential community engagement. I'm going to read the next question from Eric Hammer. This is about enforcing the CBA. Over time, it probably needs lawyers, right? There's an asymmetry. The developers and city have teams of lawyers, and community activists typically don't. How do we deal with this asymmetry?
Well, it might surprise you to hear that in the CBAs I've been involved in, which are quite a number at this point and now go back almost 20 years. I can't think of a single time when we had to sue a developer to get them to live up to the terms of the CBA. So one thing that I think is a strength of the CBA is that legally it's pretty simple. It's a document, and if it's drafted tightly on the front end, where you do need lawyers there, that it says who can enforce it and what the process is for that enforcement. And it's a contract like any other contract. And, we've had people, developers, try to sort of ignore their responsibilities. Occasionally, maybe I've done a letter on behalf of someone reminding them of their responsibilities, but usually a meeting, and usually not even needing anything from the lawyers, is enough if the developer is bound to the contract. So I would say the bigger challenge in enforcement, rather than lawyer capacity, is staff capacity for the advocacy organizations. So just like on the front end, you need lawyers, but the fundamental thing is organizers, is community advocates. That's the real staffing that is most fundamental to winning one of these things, more so than the lawyers. In the enforcement, the groups that won these things, having funding and staff to monitor it over time is more important than the lawyer function. And lawyer function you can get pro bono and isn't very time intensive, but if you don't have any staff looking at the project at all, you're never going to know when there's a violation. So it's definitely an issue. It's definitely a challenge.
Thank you. Good answer. So Sorry, Beth Barger had another question that's interesting. So could a city make a CBA a condition of a conditional use?
Yeah, I think that things get a little more complicated when you start having the city using its regulatory power. There's a big difference legally and I think politically when a city is regulating a developer, which is anything related to zoning and use permits and so forth, versus negotiating a project with the developer, which is a development agreement or a subsidy agreement or a land sale or a lease or something like that. When you're in the latter situation and it's a back and forth, you can ask for whatever, and if they agree to it, it's probably binding. You can't ask for illegal things like like discrimination asks or whatever, but you can ask for most things, and it can be part of the package. But when you're regulating, which is your hypothetical there, Beth, you're subject as the public entity to the takings clause and other restrictions on governmental action, which means things that are anything in there that you attach as a condition of a conditional use permit is just you using your police power as government, and there's usually more limitations on that. So it's not a complete ban, but it's more limited than if you're negotiating an agreement of some kind.
Perfect.
So I tell my public sector clients, if you want sort of free reign to cut an interesting and cutting edge deal with the developer, get them into a contractual negotiation as opposed to just trying to slap conditions on their approvals.
Excellent. All right, we have 5 minutes left and a couple more questions. So Lamar Guillory asks, can parties to a CBA include local school districts and housing authorities and other community-based institutions?
Yeah, they certainly can. I think, there's two types of parties to a CBA. There's the ones who are asking for things out of the project, and which is usually the advocates, and then there's the ones who are having things asked of them, which we've been talking about the developer, but is often the public entities also. It's a large portion of these projects. The community-based organizations have asks of the public entity as well as of the developer. So if a housing authority is who you want to implement a jobs program or some aspects of your housing asks, then they can be part of the CBA also. So strangely, developers can be sort of more nimble than public entities in entering into contracts. The idea that they'd enter into a contract about what they're supposed to do with the community group is not that mind-blowing to them somehow. They don't love doing it, but they, they're used to cutting deals and being in contracts, whereas like a housing authority might think it's really weird to enter into a contract with a community group about how the housing authority is going to do its business. So I think there's a little more of like a mindset shift that's needed to get the public entities to sign on to these things, but it's certainly been done lots of times.
Thank you. Okay, a couple more questions. What advice can you offer a neighborhood group to enhance its success of negotiating a CBA?
I think off the top of my head, rattle off the 6 capacities that I've heard listed as the things that a coalition needs in order to win a campaign. So a campaign, an advocacy effort for a CBA or for community benefits in a project. I believe those are an organizing capacity, a policy, so that's turning people out to meetings, public hearings and so forth, demonstrations. A policy capacity, meaning someone who's good at untangling city documents and putting things in bullet points, like the wonk capacity, basically. A political capacity, so some understanding of how to get into some meetings at City Hall with the right people and push them and have them, take your meetings and listen. A media capacity to get your message out in earned media, as they say. A legal capacity, because you absolutely cannot rely on the lawyers that a developer or the public entity offers you if you're a community-based organization. And a fundraising capacity to help pay for whichever of those things you don't have enough capacity on staff for already. So, these campaigns can take a while. I would say a typical CBA campaign is like a 2-year process, like a year to a year and a half of understanding the project, building the organizing, and building the pressure, and 6 months of negotiations leading up to the agreement. So they've taken longer, they've taken less time, but I would say that's typical. But those are the things that people say are needed. I would flip it and say, if you have all those things and you bring that pressure around a big important project, and your asks are not self-interested but are community interested, I would say that you will almost always be able to improve the project, whether it's in the form of a CBA or strengthening the city's hand in putting community benefits in its deal.
Thanks, Julian. I think that is a great place to wrap this up. We wish you were always here and always available to answer our questions. But at least we have the
Feel free to reach out. I'm happy to. I'm really glad to see the interest there, and if I can be of any help on particular projects going forward, or if it's another training needed or whatever, I'm happy to. You guys, Margie and Joanna, you've done terrific work to pull this organization off the ground, pull the toolkit together. So I'm sure people on this call and others around the city are really gonna run with it and change the conversation, and that's the first step in changing the outcome. These
Thanks,
things are really a
Julian.
cultural change. It's all different in California now than it was 20 years ago. Really.
Yeah, I bet it was. We're very grateful for your guidance, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that Action Tank is available for technical assistance to community councils or council members who are working to negotiate a community benefits agreement. We will follow up, as Margie put in the chat, with emails to everyone who registered about how to get a hard copy and how to download the digital copy, and how to get in touch with us if you need anything. Thank you. Can we give Julian a round of applause?
Woo-hoo.
Thanks, you all.
Great information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you for all your work.
Everybody. Thanks, Joanna. See you
Thanks,
soon.
David. Thanks for coming.
All right, bye.
Thank you.
Our friends from Tulsa also joined us who are interested.
That's right. TULSA, baby.
TULSA.
Okay. I'm going to stop recording.